toxic masculinity.
New York City hospitals plan to offer preferential care to patients of color.
Yeah, I told you this. I told you about this before the show.
I heard about this like a week ago, I think.
Yeah. So in New York, they're like, oh, you know what we're going to do? We're going to give preferential treatment to black people because of racism. Yeah, we're going to be racist because of racism. Hold on, I got to move my wife's. There we go. Beautiful. All right, let's see here. Woke medicine comes to New York City. How nonprofits installed an activist at a top health department post. So this is actually a really serious article. I thought this was going to be kind of funny, like, ha, 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 they're so racist, the left's so racist, this is ridiculous. But man, they did a good job on this story. This is from Washington Free Beacon. This was written by Aaron. I'm so sorry, Aaron, if you're watching. I don't know how to pronounce your last name. Sibarium? I think I got it. It's Latin sounding.
Sibarium. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Aaron Sibarium. I have no idea where you're from. I don't know what that name is, but you're a good writer and a good researcher because this is an awesome story. So let me read you this. It's pretty dire what's happening, but he breaks down exactly how these leftist groups infiltrate the public space and actually manipulate public policy into these like crazy leftist insane things. Okay, let's see here. A pair of doctors at Brigham and Women's Hospital last month outlined a pilot program that they said would offer preferential care to patients of color. The proposal, published in Boston Review, accuses hospitals across the country practicing medical apartheid, something that they said must be addressed through race-explicit interventions. And what that means is they're not going to do anything that's colorblind, non-racial. They're going to specifically target like black people and put them at the front of the line, and specifically target white people and put them at the back of the line. They're going to be racist to fight against racism. That's their position. Even though I don't think there is the racism that they're fighting against, so they're just basically being racist for no reason.
Friend James said you can simply identify as black.
Be transracial. I like that. All right, those interventions may violate civil rights laws, and Brigham and Women's Hospital assured the Washington Free Beacon that they are not currently underway at the hospital. But that hasn't stopped one of its authors, Dr. Michelle Morse, from moving on up. She is now the chief medical officer of New York City. That's dangerous. That is unbelievably dangerous. All right, let's see here. In her new post, Morse will wield enormous influence over New York's hospital system, and she has promised to use it to advance health equity. There's that word again, equity, basically meaning that we're going to artificially manipulate who gets what in the world, because equity isn't in any way creating equal outcomes. They say that it is, but it definitely does not. Okay. And the ultimate attempt at equal outcomes is communism. What does that create? It creates a completely unfair system. Valeria, you lived in a country that was once communist. In the communist USSR, were people equal? Did the president live the same way a farmer did?
No, but I mean, all the regular folks was...
Yeah, everybody was equally poor.
But
except the oligarchs and the police.
Politicians,
yes,
they weren't equal.
Yeah, so there was a stratum of very rich.
Yes.
And then there was everybody else, which is super poor.
Very poor, yeah.
So it creates the most unequal system imaginable, I think. Probably even worse than like a monarchy. Okay, let's see here. Asked how her office would address apartheid at local hospitals, Morse did not respond to a request for comment. Oh, no, sorry, I missed a bit. She says, in her new post, Morse will wield enormous influence over New York's hospital system, and she has promised to use it to advance health equity. Part of her job will be serving as liaison between the health department and local media centers, including 3 she singled out as examples of apartheid: Montefiore, New York Presbyterian, and Mount Sinai. Okay, so I actually looked these hospitals up because I was treated at a hospital in New York for I have a hip replacement. I had a pretty vicious thing in my body that tore up my hip, and like I had no cartilage in my hip. It was just basically bone on bone. And actually, when the doctor looked at it to perform the surgery, he was like, I wasn't sure if I should do it. He was like, your hip was so destroyed that I thought it might not actually work. He said, but I did it and it works and everything's great. And he did an amazing job. And I can now run and I can rock climb and I can do all the things I used to do. Of course, I got fat now, so that's my next hurdle. But I found out that none of these were the hospital I went to. I went to the Hospital for Special Surgery, which is actually right across the street from New York Presbyterian. So, but they're not related for some reason. But there's a block of hospitals basically right there. And I would like to say that while looking it up, the doctor that I had, his name is Dr. Edwin Sue. If you ever have to have a hip replacement or a hip resurfacing or something like that, go to New York, get Dr. Edwin Sue. He is literally one of the best in the world. He does all the athletes out there in New York, and he fairly recently.
How much did it cost?
I mean, it depends on your insurance and everything. It's very expensive surgery.
Expensive. I mean, you would have like co-payment and the rest of.
Yeah, exactly.
Not the co-payment, whatever it is.
It depends on your insurance. But Christy Brinkley actually got her hip replaced by the same doctor. And one of the reporters at Good Morning America, I found, did the same thing, and me. So all famous, important people. A lot of athletes go to him. He does hundreds of surgeries every year. So he's just like, he just knows exactly what he's doing. Cutting you up and cool. Putting some stuff in there. And I'm so much, it's like, it really is like a completely different lifestyle when you're like limping because, every single day because you can barely walk. And then you get this hip replacement. You're like, whoosh, you feel like the Flash, Superman. Leap tall buildings. So I'm part bionic. Anybody's asking. So phenomenal guy. And here's the funny thing about him. I doubt he's a white supremacist. Maybe, I'm not sure. But he is Asian. So fairly unlikely that the guy's a white supremacist or in some way, creating some kind of apartheid medical system, especially considering that he repairs the hips of all the NBA players and all the other athletes in New York, which I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but most NBA players black. Yeah, I don't know if everybody knows that, but true story. Let's see here. So it says she was also named the deputy commissioner for the Center for Health and Equity and Community Wellness, a division within New York City Health Department. There's a division called Center for Health Equity. God, that in itself is terrible. That's how her office would address apartheid at local hospitals. Morse did not respond to a request for comment. Morse's assent reflects the larger trajectory of progressive activism, which has migrated from the fringe of academia to the heart of public health bureaucracies. And this is where the article gets really, really good. This guy's research is fantastic. He says, Vermont's health department announced this month that people of color will get first dibs on coronavirus vaccines as part of the state's commitment to health equity. That's exactly the opposite of equity. That's called racism. If you're specifically choosing people from particular races to get health care, to get priority health care, that is racism. That's the opposite of equity. It's the opposite of equality. It's racism. And in December, the Center for Disease Control proposed vaccinating essential workers before the elderly because elderly skew white. We just want to avoid helping white people at all cost. Okay, Morse's march through the institutions from foundations to fellowship and finally top government posts reveals how radicalism has gains influence. And this is what I'm talking about. This is the brilliant research part. So supported by an incestuous network of left-wing nonprofits that credentialize activists and funnel them into positions of power, activists like Morse use studies funded by those same nonprofits to give their agenda the veneer of scientific credibility. I love that term. Or he writes a veneer, but it's the same concept. A veneer of scientific credibility. I just love how this guy writes. And since the nonprofits combine charity with activism, it's easy for them to launder the latter as the former, further insulating them from critique. So if you are activists that are also, producing some form of charity and charitably giving stuff or helping people out, then it looks like you're a good person, despite the fact that you're actually pushing a dangerous activist agenda. This used to be something that Christians did, right? Christians would go to third world countries and they would preach the gospel of Christianity whilst building a well or whilst helping to people to learn how to farm and stuff like that, which was, I think, a much, much more wholesome approach because they're not teaching something that's dangerous. They're teaching the principles of Christianity, which are beneficial to everyone. These guys are preaching, so they're sort of taking the example of Christians throughout time. We're going to preach the gospel to you whilst we're going to give you some kind of charity, and they're doing it, but they're doing it with evil things, racism essentially. Take Equal Health, which Morse co-founded in 2010 after the 2010 earthquake in Haiti. What began as a support system for Haitian healthcare workers soon became an effort to stem, quote, the miseducation of health professionals on the root causes of illness. The root causes, per the group's website, are racism and capitalism. Racism and capitalism are the root causes for illness. People become ill because of capitalism and racism, which it seeks to combat through disruptive pedagogy. Pedagogy, of course, is just a different word for education. But they have to. So this is, I've mentioned this many times on the show, but this is a technique of the left. If they don't want somebody to understand them, they'll use these. They'll use like big words, or they'll use convoluted sentences. They'll state things in a way that's so confusing that you cannot possibly understand it. It's and the reason that they do this is because if you are explaining something to somebody that actually is wrong, it's actually better for you to sound smart by using esoteric language than it is for you to clearly explain what you mean so that the person understands logically what it is. Because if somebody's impressed by your intellect, but they don't understand what you're saying, they'll just assume you're right. That tends to be true much of the time. Because they think, oh, this person's so smart, they're using all this esoteric language I don't understand. They must be smarter than me. I'll just accept what they're saying is true. The left relies on that a lot. So a lot of these people like her, they're writing these articles, they're writing these ideas down. Instead of just using common language, like education, they'll use pedagogy. Because they know nobody knows what that freaking word means, right? And so they're trying to confuse people so that people think they're smart and just believe what they're saying despite the fact that they're wrong. Because they know they're wrong. Okay. In 2015, Equal Health founded the Social Medicine Consortium, a collective of committed individuals, universities, and organizations fighting for health equity. Morse received a $100,000 grant from the Poros Equity Fellowship 3 years later. Poros being, of course, the billionaire Porge Poros, whose name I cannot say on YouTube or else I will get demonetized. So you can look up Porge Poros and try to figure out who I'm talking about. I'm sure you guys know. Or you can just read this article. It's right here. Let's see here. Equity Fellowship 3 years later to launch the Campaign Against Racism, which is actually a campaign for racism against white people, a network of health equity activists who work to dismantle racial capitalism. Racial capitalism. Wow. Are you too dark? Do I need to lighten you? Do I need to brighten you up? Is Valeria too dark, ladies and gentlemen?
Don't do this because I won't get help.
What's that?
I won't get any medical help if you will brighten me up. I want to be dark.
if I brighten Valeria up too much, she'll be too white to get medical help.
Yeah.
So we got to keep her dark. Okay, let's see here. This is called video blackface. We're using video to darken Valeria up here so she can get medical help.
If I need to.
Okay, so dismantle racial capitalism. That's a great idea. All while Equal Health continued its original work in Haiti, giving an air of humanitarian legitimacy to what became a radical group. So that's kind of what I was talking about before. This sort of legitimization, or legitimation? Is it legitimation? Is that the word? I thought it was legitimatization. Legitimatization? I don't know. Something like that. Gives activists a foothold to further burnish their credentials. Morse went on to a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation fellowship that sent her to Washington, D.C. to work on health equity priorities with the House Ways and Means Committee. By the time she became New York's chief medical officer, she had experience in both nonprofits and government, making her a prime candidate for the position. She was fully indoctrinated and ready to go. Once in power, activists are buoyed by a flood of foundation-funded studies to serve to justify their agenda. Race-conscious policies of the sort Morse advocated have found a home in prominent medical journals such as The Lancet, which in February released a Soros-supported report calling reparations a public health measure. These studies cite other forms of the same nonprofit complex, giving activism an air of academic legitimacy. So you kind of can see what's happening here. The same people who are pushing the advancement of certain activists, they're also pushing these papers, and then the activists use the papers to justify their activism. And basically it's all just all these different elements are supporting each other to create this pretense of legitimacy when it's all just basically activism. The Brigham and Women's Hospital proposal is a case in point. Every stage of the argument, from diagnosis to prescription, rests on foundation-funded critical race theory. The proposal borrows heavily from a paper, Critical Race Theory, Race, Equity, and Public Health Toward Anti-Racism Praxis. Praxis, there's another nice esoteric word that they like to throw in. That was funded by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation and written by 2 health equity scholars. Anytime you see the word equity, you know the person's an a-hole. Who argue race-conscious programs are better than colorblind ones at reducing racial health disparities. No kidding. No kidding. Obviously, if you think, okay, well, this group is getting better healthcare than that group, if this racial group, like let's say white people are getting better healthcare than black people, don't look at income. Don't look at anything else. Don't look at any reason why maybe they're getting better healthcare. Just look at the fact that one's white, one's black, one's getting better healthcare than the other. Of course, then if you say, well, we're just going to prioritize black people and give them better healthcare, of course you're going to have greater equity. But that doesn't actually solve the problem or the reason why they're getting worse healthcare. You got to look at that. But solving it the way they're doing it could be incredibly dangerous to black people. And we'll get to that in a second. By assuming the existence of institutional racism across American institutions, Morse's 2019 study reads, we can turn from research focused on documenting disparities and inequities to implementing research directed toward correcting them. So I'm almost done here, folks. The Brigham and Women's Health Hospital plan also calls for reparations as a form of medical restitution, citing a paper that claims to model their effect on COVID-19 transmission. That paper, which Morse co-authored, was likely supported by nonprofits as well as government grants and rests on similar assumptions about institutional racism. Estimates of disease transmittability, the paper says, seldom capture oppressive social forces, including institutionalized racism and sexism, an omission it describes as the symbolic violence of Roe. I don't even understand that at all. The symbolic violence of Roe. That doesn't even make sense. I'm sure it explains it in the article very clearly. Since reparations weren't in place, ending coronavirus lockdowns had a disproportionate adverse mortality effect on black people and thus resembled a modern Tuskegee experiment. Give me a break. Just the way they express things is so BS. Maybe black people in America just are less healthy on average than white people in America. Maybe that's why it had a disproportionately adverse mortality effect. But it's a modern Tuskegee experiment, as if people are intentionally infecting black people with COVID and trying to get them to die. Give me a break. Tuskegee experiment was, I think they intentionally withheld treatment from black men with syphilis just to see how it would affect the human body or something like that. It was pretty disturbing. It was, in fact, a vicious thing that was absolutely immoral. But black people dying disproportionately of COVID is not anything like that. But it is arguably doctors like Morse who are proposing medical experiments on the very same patients they're claiming to help. And this is what I was talking about, how this is going to hurt black people. If implemented, the pilot program at Brigham and Women's Hospital would be an unprecedented act of social engineering rather than relying on provider discretion or patient self-advocacy to determine whether they should go to cardiology or general medicine. Instead of that, the program would encourage doctors to send black and Latino heart failure patients to cardiology every single time or more often, on the grounds that minorities are referred less often to cardiologists than white patients. But here's the problem with that. The hospital's own data suggests that this could backfire, causing worse outcomes for minority patients. Sorry, here's the reason for that. Between 2007 and 2018, black heart failure patients were more than 3 times as likely than white heart failure patients to have end-stage renal disease. Now, this requires a dialysis machine to treat. Since general care is used to refer patients for dialysis, patients with both heart and kidney failure may be a better fit for general care. So they should be referred to general care. So sending them to a cardiologist instead could delay life-saving treatment. So that makes total sense. They're prescribed general care instead of a cardiologist, a specialist. Okay, and also this is another problem. It could also lead black patients to getting too much care rather than too little. And this is a common critique of the American medical system, that it funnels patients to specialists instead of general care practitioners, resulting in misdiagnoses and unnecessary treatments. That excess care can have fatal consequences. Medical error, I didn't even know this till I read this article. This is shocking. Medical error is the third leading cause of death in the United States. So always get a second opinion, ladies and gentlemen. Do not just take your doctor's word for anything. Medical error is the third leading cause of death in America. So by increasing the rate at which black patients are referred to cardiac specialists, the program could hurt the very people it's meant to help. Brigham and Women's Hospital may not pursue this particular medical experiment, but in her new role with the city of New York, Morse will have plenty of test subjects. So, I'm done with that article. Darling, do you have any reaction to this?
No.
Just say racism is bad.
Racism is bad.
Yes, I agree. You're like a genius.
So every time when I have nothing to say, can I say racism is bad?
Yeah, absolutely. Please do. We're doing something on like the environment or something completely unrelated.
Climate change is real. Biden won. For YouTube monetization.
Yes, Susan. We agree with you. There is no problem with the election in 2020. Everything is perfect. Okay. We have one last story. You want to read the headline?
My Pillow sues Dominion voting system for $1.6 billion.
I love this story. I love
USA.
this story. This is like my favorite story. I love this because this is
Dominion system sues My Pillow guy, and My Pillow guy sues Dominion voting system for the same amount of money or more.
0.4 billion more. So 400 million more. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, this is what I call fighting back, guys. I mean, I'm constantly complaining that conservatives don't.
Best protection is attacking.
Yeah, that's right. The best defense is a good offense. So they must say that in Russia.
I said it in Russian.
Yeah, he said it in Russian.
What is the best defense?
The best defense is a good offense. Toxic Masculinity. Weekdays, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific.